Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to analyze a pretty comprehensive stack of materials, all centered on moral reasoning and cognitive processing.
It's a huge topic.
It is. We're trying to answer a massive question. How do we decide what's right? And how does that process develop, whether you're, a third grader or a state-of-the-art AI?
And the scope is incredible. We're starting with the foundational psychology, Piaget, Kohlberg, Gilligan, and then we're jumping all the way to these new computational sources.
Where they're basically trying to model these exact processes.
Exactly. They're using these cutting-edge AI models as sort of proxy cognitive systems to see if they can learn to justify their choices in a way that's actually human, that's psychologically meaningful.
So the challenge for us today is really to connect those two worlds. What's the fundamental link between how we think our, raw analytical horsepower and how we land on an ethical conclusion?
And the literature is pretty clear on this. The quality of the moral output depends fundamentally on the quality of the cognitive architecture underneath.
So to understand that architecture, we have to start with the human foundation.
And the materials really point to one place to start. This undeniable, measurable link between cognitive growth and moral judgment in kids.
Okay, let's dig into that starting point. We have the study on elementary school students, right? They measured cognitive development and moral reasoning side by side. What did the numbers actually show?
The results were pretty stark. They found a strong positive correlation between the two. The number was 0.775.
Wow, 0.775.
Yeah, which is statistically very significant.
Yeah.
What it tells us is that as a child's ability to think in complex ways gets better, their ability to reason ethically becomes, a lot more sophisticated.
0.775 correlation that's huge. But let me push back on that for a second.
Sure.
Doesn't that just risk meaning that smarter kids are better at taking tests about morality without them actually being, more moral people?
That's a really fair point. But it's important to look at what they measured. It wasn't just like rote memorization of rules. They were assessing these core cognitive factors. Memory, sure, but also problem solving, critical thinking. And this is the key metacognitive skills.
The ability to think about your own thinking.
Exactly. Self-awareness, how you learn, how you set goals. It's about the machinery of thought itself.
So it's about the raw ability to handle complexity and nuance.
Yeah.
What did they find when they asked the students to assess themselves? Any specific data there?
Yeah, and this is fascinating. The students were really confident in their learning strengths. A mean score of 4.08, and in their own critical thinking, that was a 3.90. So they feel like capable thinkers.
But there was a gap.
A big one. When it came to applying that cognition externally, analyzing different perspectives, actively looking for feedback, the scores dropped. They hovered around 3.35 and had a lot more variation.
That's a really sharp insight. It suggests the internal horsepower is there, but translating that into social complexity, seeing the world through someone else's eyes, that's the real developmental hurdle.
Exactly. Your analytical skills don't just automatically make you socially moral. And the sources remind us this foundation gets built so early. The literature highlights brain plasticity, these sensitive periods, up to about age 5.
That's when the whole architecture for language and social skills is laid down.
And the environment's role in that is just massive.
Undeniably.
Socioeconomic status, SES, is a huge factor. The sources point out that kids from lower SES backgrounds can face these systemic challenges, like limited access to quality early education or healthcare, which can cause delays.
So building a strong moral thinker means building a strong thinker, period. And that means looking at these big structural issues.
Right. And before we move on, there was this fascinating bit in the literature review about how early kids start to differentiate rules, even in elementary school.
They're not just passively following orders.
Not at all.
Yeah.
They show this really sharp moral cognizance. They can tell the difference between a universal moral rule and just, a social convention.
Like they get that stealing is always wrong.
Always wrong. And it's separate from who's in charge.
Yeah.
That was the key anecdote, right? The kids would say, even if the teacher says it's okay to hit someone, it's still not all right.
They've already grasped that moral law is autonomous. It's above the teacher.
Whereas things like, classroom etiquette or dress codes, they get that those are social conventions. They're negotiable. They're building this early internal theory of justice.
Which leads us perfectly into the big theories. To really formalize how this reasoning matures, we have to talk about Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral development.
Kohlberg is essential, yeah. But the main idea often gets a little bit misunderstood. His theory is fundamentally cognitive. He wasn't interested in the moral conclusion, what Heinz should do.
He was interested in the justification.
The justification. the structure of the argument,
Yeah.
the why.
Okay, let's use his famous thought experiment to walk through it. The Heinz dilemma. His wife is dying. There's one drug that can save her, but the druggist is charging a fortune. Should Heinz steal it?
Right. So a pre-conventional thinker, level 1, is all about self-interest. A kid at stage 1 might say, he shouldn't steal because he'll go to jail. Pure punishment avoidance.
And stage 2?
Stage 2 is the what's in it for me stage. So he should steal it, so his wife will be around to make him dinner. It's about maximizing your own reward.
That's a very external kind of morality. You're only good because of the consequences for you.
Totally. Then you move to level 2, the conventional level. This is all about social roles. A stage 3 response is the good boy, good girl orientation. He should steal it because that's what a loving husband does and everyone will think he's a hero.
It's about seeking approval.
Exactly. And stage 4 is the law and order perspective. He shouldn't steal because it's against the law. If everyone broke the law, society would collapse. This is where most adults operate, by the way.
And then the final level, the post-conventional level, what separates those thinkers?
The ability to see laws as separate from universal human rights. At stage 5, the social contract stage, you recognize that laws are for human welfare, and they can be changed if they fail to serve that purpose.
And the peak, stage 6.
Stage 6 is about universal principles. The justification for stealing would be something like, the universal principle of the right to life fundamentally outweighs the specific law protecting property rights. It's abstract, it's universal.
It's a powerful framework. But it wasn't the whole story. Carol Gilligan came in and really widened the lens.
Oh, she was vital. Gilligan pointed out that Kohlberg's research was, well, really biased. He only studied young white males. And she noticed that in his framework, women often seemed to get stuck at stage 3.
The good girl stage.
Right, which made it look like women were less morally developed because they were prioritizing relationships and approval.
So what was her alternative, her counter-argument?
She said his ethics of justice, this focus on universal rules and abstract principles, was just one side of the coin. She proposed an ethics of care.
Which emphasizes what?
Relationships, compassion, empathy, context. So instead of asking, what's the rule here, you ask, what action preserves relationships and minimizes harm for everyone involved?
That makes sense. It's a completely different way of framing the problem.
It is. The justice view looks at Heinz and sees a conflict of rights life versus property. The care view looks at Heinz and sees a web of relationships and the potential for suffering.
And modern psychology now sees them as two complementary orientations, right?
Yeah, that both men and women develop. But this whole debate raises a huge problem for AI. If human morality is this dance between abstract rules and contextual empathy, how do you train a machine to do both?
The AI can do the rules part. Can it handle the emotional context?
That is the million-dollar question, and it takes us right into our next section, this new computational frontier.
Okay, let's jump in. Researchers are now using large language models, LLMs, as what they call dual-purpose cognitive models. We're asking the machine not just to solve the problem, but to show its work.
And this is where it gets really clever. A traditional neural network, it might be great at predicting what someone will do, say, if they'll make a risky choice, but it's a total black box. It can't tell you what.
It can't give you the cognitive mechanisms.
Right. So the goal here is to get an AI that doesn't just give you a stage 6 answer, but gives you a stage 6 justification that sounds genuinely human.
So how do they do it? The methodology in the sources talks about reinforcement learning and chain of thought reasoning.
Let's break those down. Chain of thought, or I'll code ET, is basically the model talking itself through the problem. It generates all the intermediate steps, and the researchers treat that as the machine's thought process.
So it's verbalizing its homework.
That's a great way to put it. And reinforcement learning, or RL, is how it's trained. The model gets rewarded when its predictions match what actual humans chose in risky situations.
So it's trying to find the best reasoning to explain our choices.
Exactly. The algorithm is trying to surface the most relevant psychological language in its chain of thought to explain why we do what we do. It's teaching the AI to talk like a behavioral psychologist.
That's incredible. So instead of just feeding it rules, you're rewarding it for mimicking the psychological weirdness that governs human choices.
Pretty much.
So what mechanisms did the model learn were most important?
The RL process was really successful. The two mechanisms that surface most often in the model's reasoning were expected value computation and risk aversion.
Okay, let's define those, because this is where ethics starts to look like economics.
It is. Expected value, or EV, is the purely rational mathematical approach. You just multiply the odds of an outcome by its value. A purely rational agent always picks the option with the highest EV.
But humans aren't purely rational agents.
Not even close. And that's where risk aversion comes in. It's our tendency to prefer a sure thing over a gamble, even if the gamble has a higher expected value on paper. It's the human fear of the unknown.
So the model learned it had to account for that fear. What else did it pick up on?
It also surfaced things like loss aversion. The fact that losing $10 hurts way more than finding $10 feels good. And the certainty effect, where we overvalue guaranteed outcomes. And even framing effects.
How you ask the question changes the answer.
Even if the math is identical. So yeah, the process created an AI that generates this little internal monologue that references rational math, but at the same time corrects for all these ingrained human biases.
Which brings us to the most important question. Is that internal monologue, that chain of thought, just window dressing? Or does the quality of the reasoning actually improve the final answer?
That's the critical finding. And to test it, the researchers ran what they call the COT swapping experiment.
Okay, what does that mean?
They took the high-quality reasoning, the COT, from their well-trained RL model, and they basically injected it into a dumber base model. They wanted to see if better reasoning alone could improve the dumber model's predictions.
And what happened?
It worked. Using the RL-trained model's SOAP-IT significantly reduced the prediction error of the base model. To put it simply, the machine that reasoned like a psychologist was able to teach the dumber machine how to be more accurate.
That's profound. It means the reasoning itself is a superior, transferable piece of knowledge.
It is. And the reverse was also true.
Of course.
When they fed the high-quality RL model, the bad reasoning from the base model, its accuracy tanked. This is sort of the smoking gun. It shows the model isn't just getting better scores, it's generating genuinely higher quality psychological explanations that lead to better predictions.
This all sounds amazing, but there has to be a catch. The sources mention a constraint, something called the elicitation hypothesis.
Yes, and it's a simple but critical constraint. The whole process depends on the power of the initial LLM you start with, your backbone model. To prove it, they ran the whole experiment again with a much smaller, weaker AI.
And I'm guessing it didn't go so well.
It failed completely. The smaller model couldn't even manage to use key mechanisms like calculating expected value in its reasoning. It just didn't have the raw cognitive capacity to do the math.
So the takeaway is, if the underlying engine is weak, no amount of fancy training can force it to develop high-level moral reasoning. The core capacity has to be there first.
Exactly. And that has huge implications for cognitive science. The AI, by being forced to justify its answers with things like expected value, it kind of pushes us to see the rational core in our own decision-making, even alongside all our biases.
This has been a really remarkable journey. We started in an elementary school classroom, right? We saw that basic link between cognitive growth and moral complexity.
That critical thinking is the raw material for ethical thought.
And then we moved through that classic debate between Justice and Kohlberg and Gilligan, which challenged us to think about both rules and relationships.
And we ended up here on the computational frontier, where an AI is literally learning to think like a psychologist. The thread connecting all of it is that the quality of the justification, the rigor of that chain of thought is what really matters.
It's what determines the outcome.
And the fact that an LLM generating better psychological reasoning actually improves its predictions of our behavior, that raises a really profound question. What does it mean to advance our own morality? Is it about learning abstract principles? Is it about prioritizing empathy? Or is it about mastering this complex calculus of our own biases and rational outcomes, just like the algorithm is trying to do?
And that brings us right back to the beginning. Think about it. Even these incredibly advanced AI models fail when they don't have the core capacity for rational computation. They can't calculate expected value if they aren't built for it. So what does that tell us about the importance of mastering our own basic critical thinking and analytical skills before we can ever hope to advance our ethical decision-making?
It's the foundation for everything else.
It is. It's a challenge for you to explore what's the relationship between technical skill and ethical outcomes in your own field. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.